welcome to Desert Wanderers, produced by Salt and Light Radio. If you're new here, we bridge the gap between you and the person in the pew next to you. I will be interviewing priests, religious, and laity in our local Boise diocese, asking questions that'll help you navigate your vocation and help build community wherever you are with whatever resources you may have. Let's build the city of God together. Well, welcome, Sarah Neely. I'm so excited to have you on. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
We were kind of talking offline, and this podcast is going to be very fruitful. We had a while back, I listened to a podcaster, and he said whenever he had struggle, like whenever he struggled with getting a host on or having some of his equipment fail or anything like that, he knew that it was really important because the devil is trying to block the information. And I have to say, our scheduling, I've been sick like a month in a row. So to finally
Yeah.
sit down and have a conversation with you is going to be wonderful. And I'm excited to talk about our topic today. So I just want to again thank you for coming on the show, and I appreciate your expertise. So today we are going to be talking about pro-life issues in Idaho and probably a little bit beyond. But before I start there, I would love to just ask you about your background. So kind of what brought you to the point to work in this pro-life work, and kind of maybe a vocation story that goes along with that and how your faith aligns with that work as well.
Yeah. Well, I grew up probably, I mean, if we had to go to the beginning of why, my mom was a teenage mom. She got pregnant when she was 17, with my oldest sibling, my brother. And she also had an experience, where she had gotten pregnant before. My mom has a wild story. We don't have time to go into it, but, before she came to the Lord, but she had a lot of traumatic things happen to her. And one of them was getting pregnant with my oldest brother and being forced to marry, the father of that child, of my brother. And so because of her experiences, she ended up becoming a nurse later in life. She became a Christian, shortly before she met my dad, and before me and my sister were born. So our siblings, there's four of us, we're kind of like sets, like there's two older ones and two younger ones. Um, and so because of her experience, she was very pro-life, but she became a nurse. She did a lot of social work, and she loved working with young pregnant moms. So I grew up in a house that worked with young pregnant moms all the time. And I mean, my mom would always like have a client that she would try to almost kind of like adopt for Christmas. I remember going over to people's houses to bring them gifts. There was a woman in our church actually who was raped and became pregnant. And my mom walked with her we were at her birth. We were at the child's birth. So it was just instilled in us growing up that pregnant women in difficult circumstances weren't hurdles that couldn't be overcome, and that children were still valuable in those situations. And then as I grew up and got older, I went off to college, and I actually did an art project. And the art project was for this 3D class, and we were supposed to use shock value. That was the whole point of it. And so I decided, and we had to pick a political issue. That was the other half of it. So I chose abortion. I had a professor who did not love that idea. She told me that the last person that did that, that students tore up her art and she dropped out of the program. And I was like, don't worry, I'm not going to do that. You don't have to worry about me. I'm not going to drop out. So anyway, I did this project, but for the project, I wanted to use photos of aborted babies. Like that was going to be my shock value. But I had never seen a photo of an aborted baby. I mean, I've grown up pro-life. I grew up believing that abortion was not the best choice for a woman, that it wasn't the healthiest choice or the safest choice or the most emotionally empowering choice. But I had just never seen those photos. And so I remember I sat down at my computer with my Internet Explorer because we didn't have Google. And I just typed it in. I typed in, picture of aborted baby. And I remember going across different pro-life websites and looking at those images and just thinking, how could another human do this to another human? Like it was just so jarring to me. Um, and so I think that's kind of where it started for me, as also the other half of that being like, how can I stop this from happening to another human? Like, what can I do? So anyway, I started getting into some pro-life outreach. I ended up going on this sort of mission trip to Ireland, where I got to do a lot of pro-life activism, and that was in my second year of college, and that really probably set it off for me. I loved that trip. I loved doing pro-life outreach, and I wanted what was going on in Ireland because at the time, that Ireland at the time was still abortion free, that abortion was completely illegal. And I just knew like I wanted to, what we were doing there, reaching people, I wanted to do that in America. And so by the time I got done with college, I found a group that I wanted to intern with. I started working with them. That led to working to another group with another group. And I actually, when I graduated from college, I was just thinking about this because it was in 2016 that I went to this one march for, I went to a trip, another trip to Ireland, and I met a pro-life leader there, and I was graduating. And I was like, do you do a summer internship? And he was like, yeah, we do. Do you want to be on the team? And I told myself I had always thought I'd get my master's and go and get my doctorate. I loved school, and I thought I'll take a break this summer and then I'll come back to the master's idea. And I never did that. I ended up doing pro-life ministry, and now I do it full time. And that was a good 20 years ago.
That's amazing. So, with your background, one of the first things I wanted to ask you is I know many, not all, but many of our listeners here, they're parents. And I think I've heard this from a few of my family members and a few of my friends' family members where they had like either an ultrasound or even like an abort. I think my grandma put a picture of an abortion, like an aborted baby on the fridge. And my dad was like, I could never be pro-abortion because I looked at that every day for my childhood. But I also think that's kind of scarring. So I guess how can we raise pro-life children? And this just kind of goes from your mom's story a little bit, kind of pulling that from your own childhood. How do you think we can raise more pro-life children and have the next generation be more pro-life?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is talking to them, not to be afraid to talk to them about abortion because someone else is going to talk to them. That isn't you in the world we live in. The abortion industry in particular targets children early. They want these girls sexually active and on some kind of birth control that they will forget to take so that they will get pregnant and come in and be an abortion customer. Um, so I think with one thing with my mom that I really appreciated is she was always very open with her story about her life before she was a Christian. And I mean, my mom was kind of like, you could never one up her. Like, I don't think I could have done anything that enough to shock my mom because she had had so much crazy stuff happen to her. And not everybody's mom is going to be like that. But the other thing is we were always taught that we are image bearers of God, and that because of that, like your value wasn't because you were a good person or not a bad person. Your value was because you were created in the image of God. And I think kids understand that pretty easily. I will say though, when you're talking to them about abortion, because I've been in situations because of the job I do where a child might ask me, what is an abortion? And I'm like looking at their mom like, is it okay to talk to them about this? I don't want to upset anybody. But in Ireland, actually, a great example is we had tons of graphic images that we were carrying around, images of abortion victims. We also had a lot of images of development, of the stages of development in the uterus. And I noticed that I think parents set the tone because I noticed that whenever a parent would walk up and a little kid would walk up and look at the picture, and I watched a little kid one time just look at it and go, baby broken, mommy. And she just very calmly said, yeah, that baby got hurt, and we don't want to hurt babies. And that was it. That was the whole conversation. I've seen other parents. I saw a parent that came up and the parent was upset and she was getting really angry about the pictures. And so the child started getting really angry about the pictures. And the child doesn't even know what she's really
What are
looking
you
at,
looking at?
but
Yeah.
she's just following what her mom is doing. So I think that it's just important that you set the tone, like that the parent sets the tone. Like, one, it's okay to talk about this, but also let's talk about why this is bad. Instead of, I don't want to say shielding them because I do think it's important to shield children and not make them carry the burden of everything, knowing everything all at once.
Right.
Um, but in the world we live in, they're gonna find out about stuff. And so, I think as parents, you have to be okay to talk about it. And to not be afraid of maybe that you're going to traumatize them early or something, but it's how you talk to them, like I said, I mean, just especially focusing on why would this be bad? Because a human life is valuable because God made that human life, because God's the only person or the only entity that has the ability or the authority to choose if someone lives or dies. We don't choose that for an innocent person.
Right.
And I say that, I will say that, I will temper that saying I do not have any like younger teenage children. So I mean, I'm not parenting a child of that age. But I have worked with a lot of youth and I've worked with a lot of older kids. And I've had a lot of young kids ask me questions. And I just always found that if your attitude is compassion and a thirst for knowledge and an understanding of God, that's the attitude that they'll have too.
Absolutely. So another question as you were kind of giving your vocation story that came to my mind is, and I've kind of struggled with this for a while. I mentioned it before on the podcast, actually. Um, but is this idea that for a long time, I kind of had this feeling that, like people that support abortion are just like morally wrong. Like they're just morally wrong. They're just bad. There's just evil surrounding that, right? And then I listened to this debate and I didn't agree with a single thing that the lady was saying. It was she was in she hadn't got her doctorate yet, but she was debating I think it was Michael Knowles or something like that. And they were debating and I just remember thinking like the reason that she's taking this stance is like not a bad one. To see that there's pain and suffering around not being in the right situation and not having the financial needs and stuff. But I don't think that the means make the end, right? Like just because you have those problems doesn't mean that abortion's the answer, right? I would 100% stand on that. I didn't think her arguments were very good, but all it did for me is for the first time I saw them not as just like, I just didn't write them off as some evil person, right? So I
Yeah.
guess in your view, why do people support or consider themselves pro-abortion?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of said it. They think that they're being compassionate. And also they're also the normal person, the typical person. Um, I don't think that they're in like that they're so evil that they want to kill babies,
Right.
and that's why they're supporting it. I think that they're misinformed a lot of times, and I think that they're dealing with basically a propaganda machine that has told us for 40, 50 years that somehow abortion empowers women and that if you don't support abortion, you hate women. That's kind of like what
Mhm.
they're told constantly, and nobody wants to be that person.
Right.
And then also they don't the typical if I talk to someone who wants to talk about abortion, finds out what I do or whatever, and just in a normal setting where I wouldn't, not like at a debate, just like a normal person. Um, I often ask them, what they know about abortion, because most Americans that say they support abortion have no idea how it's done. They don't know. They've
Really?
never seen a picture. And if they have seen anything close to anything of a picture, they've just been told that's a clump of cells. Or a lot of people have been told that those pictures aren't real, that those pictures are a
Really?
lie, that they're made up. And this was before AI. I mean, like now, who knows what pictures are and aren't real that are made today. But and you really have to put like this distance between yourself and a preborn child. You have to build up these walls for abortion to be okay. Um, and the biggest way you have to do that is you have to dehumanize the child, right? Because no argument you hear for abortion is an argument you hear applied for a 2-year-old.
Right.
Nobody
Absolutely.
would say, "Oh, well, this mom just couldn't take it. She wanted to go to college, or she was raped and then had the baby, and the baby's like 2, and she just can't take it anymore." No one would be like, "That's fine. You can murder the 2-year-old." Like that's
Right.
insane.
Yeah.
The only way any argument for abortion works is if you take away the humanity of the child. And so usually if I'm talking to people about that are pro-abortion, I want to know, what do you know about abortion? Like, what do you think abortion is? Do you think there's any kind of cutoff where, help them unpack their ideas? Because most people who say I'm pro-choice have never thought about it. Like they have not unpacked any of their ideas. They have not unpacked any like of their philosophy about it or their ideology. Like they just sort of read a headline, they see the headlines, they hear what the propaganda machine says, and that's what they say. So I think that it's important to be able to engage in conversation and also to be prepared to defend the pro-life stance. You want to be good at that before you enter
Right.
into a conversation. But I've had a lot of conversations with people, and I just think that most people who the average, like we already know that most Americans are against late-term abortion. Most Americans don't think that's a good idea. Well, why don't they think that's a good idea? Because they know that a baby at 9 months is a baby, and they're just not making that connection all the way through pregnancy, all the way back to like week one of a
Right.
pregnancy. And so it's
Right.
kind of the idea of how do you get them to make that connection? And I mean, we have so much more science now than we had in, 1973 when Roe v. Wade was decided. We have so much more understanding of what goes on in the womb than we ever had before. I think we have a lot of good information on our side. It's just hard to get that into the hands of people who have an idea of what they think abortion and pro-choice means, but also have an idea of what they think a pro-lifer looks like, and they think,
Mhm.
and again, this has a lot to do with mainstream media and what we're just constantly pushed with. I mean, Planned Parenthood spends an incredible amount of money on their, website and on their social media and on reaching people. Like, I mean, like way more money than pro-life groups ever have, Um, so yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And then it kind of points me into the point too, because you said something what their idea of a pro-lifer was, right? Because I've even thought, a lot of people talk about, well, pro-lifers, you only care about the baby. Like you don't care about what happens to the baby after they're born. And I think that's just, um, sure, maybe some pro-lifers may be like that, but for the majority, I think a lot of pro-lifers um, support programs for mothers afterward. I was just at a church in Oregon and it was a Catholic church and I went downstairs and guess what they have? This is the coolest thing I've ever seen. They had a shelf, like one set of shelves, and in it was formula, diapers, wipes, like everything you could think of. It had pacifiers, it had bibs, had bottles, had everything you could need. And it said, please like it was being like, please only take one package of diapers, like for the
Yeah.
week, and you could check out like a meat or like take only one thing of, whatever, so that it could have enough for everybody. But it had a whole thing there, and then you go over to the next one, and it's all close to up to like 18 months or something like that, where it's like,
Mhm.
please take up to like 3 or 4 or whatever for, and then it had baskets and baskets of clothes of just like, and how beautiful it to like they're supporting their direct community, but I know across the street from that church, there's also I think it's the Hope Pregnancy Center or something like that.
Mhm.
But I think there's a lot of more than people know. There's a lot of people supporting pregnant women when they find them. There's a hospital here in Boise that they do purity products for women that they give out. They also give out tons of diapers and wipes, formula, and all the things that a woman might need. And they actually have programs. I believe, I could be wrong on this, but I believe they have programs that if you're in a financial crisis, that they'll help you.
Yeah. There's right now over 650 abortion clinics in America. There's close to 4,000 pregnancy centers.
Yeah.
And the difference is that a woman's not going to pay for the services she receives at a pregnancy center. And the
Yeah.
difference is that most pregnancy centers don't get government funding. A lot of them are done strictly on donation. And so yeah, when people say like, "Oh, you guys don't care about the mom, you only care about the baby," that's not true. That isn't what has been shown by the pro-life movement and by pro-life people in America. We have created resources from nothing for women who need them. And most of those pregnancy centers, they stay with that woman. They stay with her throughout the pregnancy, throughout the first year. I actually, my husband and I, we got married in 2020 and we got pregnant. I had a really difficult pregnancy. We ended up having our daughter 3 months early. She lived in the NICU for 6.5 months before she passed away. And when I got pregnant, nobody would see me until I was like 11 or 12 weeks. And I wanted to go for an ultrasound sooner. So I lived in Durham and I just called the pregnancy center. I'm a pro-life person and that's where I would send anybody. And so I called them and they actually came, they did my first ultrasound. And it was really interesting actually going through as a client as opposed to just being like a pro-life person that would come in and but they were so sweet, but they stayed with me. They contacted me all the way through the pregnancy, even
Yeah.
after Marigold, like when Marigold was in the NICU. They still contacted me. There was just one girl who would email me and she would pray for Marigold. She'd ask how they could pray. They sent us a card and flowers like when Marigold passed. I mean, they didn't have to do that. I wasn't even like a mom in trouble. I mean, not in the sense of like a single mom or someone in a really difficult circumstance. I was married, had a job, you know. I really just came to them because I knew that they would see me early and you know, they could have just let me and I told them who I was. I mean, I was like, look, like I work for pro-life ministry, you know, and they didn't have to do that, but they did because they cared. And they did
Right.
it because that's their protocol is to care, you know, and to stick with these women and help them.
Yeah, and walk with them. And I think that's what it truly like. I think most of the time that's would be the difference between what I hear is what is portrayed as a pro-lifer, right, versus what it is actually to be someone that believes in the pro-life, or being pro-life, all the way through like womb to tomb, right?
Yeah.
So I guess before we get into the topics, the last thing I want to ask you about on this topic would be sometimes pro-abortionists have just like heard this and they don't really think about it anymore. And
Mhm.
that's like you said, it's been 50, 60 years of this being said to them. Now, on the other hand, I do think that the pro-life movement is getting some traction. I think people are starting to wake up, and I do think again that's all because of the pro-lifer works that are being done. Your guys' program or your guys' company and others that are spreading the message and really being a part of this movement. So, um, my question here is again, how would you say that the idea is just to talk to people and make sure they know the arguments, or how do we prevent that from happening on the other side? So like say if the pro-life movement was to become the predominant side, how would you make it so that that everyone was, I guess, knowledgeable and not just being like, "Oh, I'm pro-life because I've been pro-life, my parents were pro," like those
Yeah.
kind of questions.
Gosh, you know, there's so many ways. There's so many ways that that could be done, I think. I think on like I think on like a grassroots, if we're just talking about like a cultural level, I think one important thing is churches talking about it. Churches historically don't like to talk about abortion. It's not popular. They don't want to hurt people's feelings. They're worried that there's post-abortive women in their congregation. And I actually know a woman who she actually runs the mobile ultrasound unit in Birmingham, close to where I live, and she's post-abortive. And she had a pastor tell her one time, "Well, I don't want to cause any more pain." And she said, "We're already in pain. Women who have had abortions sitting in a congregation, they're already in pain. You're not helping by not telling us that there's forgiveness and healing."
Mm,
So
mm,
I just think that like just on like a cultural level, we have to change minds and hearts. And I think pastors could really help with that. I think that churches could really help a whole lot more than a lot of them are. And that's not to say there aren't pro-life churches. There are. I go to a very pro-life church. But especially like you know, if you imagine that you organize a vigil, a prayer vigil in your town, and you tell every church in the city about it, and then 20 people come, you know, or I was just at a march for life where there was a pastor from one of the biggest churches in the city. And it was a fairly small crowd, probably like 200 people. I mean, that's a great crowd for the event, for the grassroots event that it was. It's only in its third year and it had moved locations, a lot of factors. But I thought to myself, like, where are the thousands of people that go to this man's church? You know, I think that it's important. We just can't leave it to somebody else. And I always tell people, especially if they go, like, let's say you do go to March for Life, I always tell people, don't let this be the only pro-life thing you did this year.
Mm,
Like we have to be intentional about, and it's not just about talking about people, it's about raising families that have pro-life values. It's about letting our kids and letting other people see us supporting pregnant women in difficult situations. It's about having good education about sex and about reproduction and especially I think for young girls, learning about your cycle early and learning how your body works is like a huge part of it. There's just so many things that we could do to really foster a pro-life culture. But I think it has to come. I think that, or rather, I should say, I think that it should come from the church. I think the church is called to to it says in scripture to rescue those being led away to death.
hmm.
And that's what's happening with a child in the womb that's being taken into the abortion clinic. And I think it's the church's job to foster a culture that values life and that gives dignity to babies in the womb intentionally, not just one Sunday a year. Having programs where you can have a Bible study for post-abortive women. A lot of churches are scared to do something like that, to have a ministry, because then women would have to, they'd have to acknowledge that there might be women in their church that have had abortions. Well,
Right.
okay, what
Right.
if there are? Help them, you know? I don't know, there's a lot we could do. I mean, then there's like the more legislative side, working to, and not everybody's in a position to do this. Not everybody's in a position to write legislation and get it passed and be like a senator or a representative, but everybody can go up to their state house and talk to their senators or representatives. I don't know, we just have to be really intentional and get involved. And I think that there's a lot of cynicism that kind of tells you like, oh, this problem's too big. Like I can't fix it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Everything's rigged. That's kind of like where we are, I think, as a culture right now. Like there's not a lot of hope or faith in the government, and there shouldn't be. Our faith is found in Christ.
Right. Right.
But if we all take the attitude of, well, it's just nothing can change, then nothing will change. So
Right.
I think it's important for every person to every Christian especially to find a way, like what is the way that you could save one child from abortion? Like, what is the way that you could speak for this preborn child sometime in your life? There's ways to do it. Everybody has ways to do it. And I think that we're called to do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so let's take a step in and start talking about the Idaho legislation. So you have been kind of in my worldview, we've had lots of there's a mom's group and they are very good about spending around information about what's going on in the legislation, especially when it comes to pro-life movements. So the one that we have come to talk to you today is the emergency contraceptive reproductive distro boxes. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes,
Yeah.
that's what they're called.
And so could you tell us, so this is happening in Idaho. Could you tell us a little bit of the background of this legislation? Like when was it introduced? How is it um being effectively used at this point? And then what are we doing to try to kind of stop it, as well as what is it? For anyone that might not know.
Yeah, so just to clarify, the reproductive health distro boxes are not related to legislation. Like, no legislation was passed that said that these could be made available.
Okay.
The legislation that's important is SB 1329, which went into effect in July of 2024. And so that piece of legislation specifically says that an individual shall not furnish a healthcare service or solicit to furnish a healthcare service to a minor child. Now, when we start looking into this, we realized that there are already hospitals that actually, when this change happened, they actually posted stuff on their website that said, like, under this new law, minors have to have parental consent for access to contraceptives. Okay. So if hospitals are interpreting it that way, then I'm going to assume that that's a correct interpretation. That when they say furnish a healthcare service, giving a child birth control or emergency contraception, that is something their parents need to know about. That seems to be the interpretation. So looking at that, in Idaho, you guys passed a ban for abortion. Abortion is illegal in Idaho, right? So this other group created what they call reproductive health distro boxes. And what they are they're these little boxes you can pick up, and they have emergency contraception in them. They also have, I guess, condoms, pregnancy tests, maybe. And they're free. But what they've done is they're not at a clinic, they're not at a medical place, they're just at like coffee shops and businesses across Idaho. So, and they're just sitting like on the counter. So one of the people that contacted us who signed on to our letter, like she said, there it is. Like she sent me a picture. There it was sitting on the countertop, and anybody could go in and grab it. I mean, a child could go in there, grab a box. No doctor knows, no parent knows, and now they have emergency contraception. So that's where we started when we started looking into it just to see how widely it was available. There's, I think, 45 businesses right now across Idaho where they are doing this. And what they're doing, this is their way of getting around the ban. This is their way of still getting their way when the law doesn't side with them. So instead of accepting that abortion is illegal and that children in the womb deserve to be protected, they've decided to try to sort of do this like loophole where they can give out emergency contraception, which can easily cause an abortion in your body. And then, without getting in trouble and doing it for free.
So, okay, and this is kind of a side note, but I think it's a good question. Um, there was an experience that I had. I was a captain of a team at my high school, and one of the younger girls came up to me and was saying that her cycle was late and she was really worried about it. And I was like, well, you need to go talk to your parents. You need to go probably get a go to the doctor. You probably should at least take a pregnancy test. Like, this is kind of serious. And I'm kind of thinking of her, right, in this experience. If she had access to that, if she knew that these were on the counter, she might take them. In the end of this story, she wasn't pregnant. She had something else going on that was a medical, like some other medical thing that needed to go on, but it wasn't pregnancy. So I'm thinking about this. If I am and we were in high school, right? So if I'm a teenager and I'm thinking that I might be pregnant and I take one of these, but I'm not really pregnant, what are the risks? Do you know the risks that are associated with that? Or um, what kind of sorry, complications this medication or this
Yeah.
these pills could really do to people that are uninformed because like you're saying, they're not at a hospital, they're not with
Mhm.
a they're not with a medical professional. So how are they able to decipher how could that really affect someone
Mhm.
medically even? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, things like Plan B, or I think Julie is one of them. They're sort of like a giant dose of birth control. I mean, I guess that's how I would describe it. The drug is, I'm not going to try to pronounce it. It's levonorgestrel, maybe?
I'll just put it in letters over like doo.
Yeah. So, and what it does, I mean, it does the same thing kind of that birth control is going to do. It tries to delay ovulation. If that doesn't work, it tries to thicken the mucus. If that doesn't work, it tries to prevent implantation by making your uterus basically a hostile environment, right? So that nothing will implant. Well, we know that anything that's going to try to implant is going to be a fertilized egg. So my concern would be one, I mean, birth control is probably its own show, okay, its own
Right, right,
podcast.
right,
Like I have lots of concerns about birth control and what it does to women's hormones, what it does to young women, like what it's doing to our bodies, how it's not fixing any problem that we have, just covering it up.
right,
Um, but I digress. But my concern would be one, how frequently are would these girls be taking it? No one's
right.
checking. Do they even know? So, okay, the proper dose is on the box, right? Okay, sure. Um, that doesn't mean anything.
Who,
People take drugs the wrong way all the time.
yeah,
And would they even know, like, what would it do to their body if, like, every week they decide they were going to take emergency contraception so they didn't get pregnant? You
right,
know?
right.
again, I'm not a medical person. I've only done research on, effects of birth control or possible complications of abortion. So I'm not a doctor, but I do know that Plan B has to mess with your hormones. That's what it does. And if children are just being allowed access to this without any guidance from a medical professional, any guidance from their parents, my question kind of would be like, how can you guarantee me that it's not gonna cause a complication?
Right.
No,
And
like,
it's like the thing is how many people are looking at the side effects on a box when they take a medication, right? Even if a
right.
doctor gives it to you, right? And
And
again, this is
women
this
right now, I mean, there's like a whole movement of women right now who are like, we were lied to about birth control.
right,
Like, we were not told all the risks, you
right.
know? So, emergency contraception falls under contraceptives. It's
Yeah.
birth control.
So
So,
I wouldn't put this out as a Christian movie, but there is a movie called The Business of Birth Control that kind of talks about how birth control came about and the side effects it has on women. I definitely think it's a more secular view. I'm going to put that like caveat on, but I think it's a fantastic film. Their interpret and what I would say is that their interpretation at the end of what the solution to birth control, I think I would disagree with. But if you're looking for like information about
yeah.
like how the money works in birth control, I think it's a very good film for that. And it tells you the same thing where it's like these women that are getting frustrated, like this is not what we signed on for, right? This is not what we were
Right.
looking for.
We're essentially told, and Planned Parenthood still says this, that birth control is as safe as Tylenol. That is the same as Tylenol. That is just like something you take when you have a headache. Well, Tylenol isn't altering your hormones.
Right.
And altering your hormones in a woman's body is a big deal,
Right.
especially if you're doing it repeatedly. So,
Repeatedly.
yes,
Yeah.
definitely some
Absolutely.
concern.
Well, I won't go there. I was gonna say I've heard things that Tylenol is not even that safe anymore, but
Yeah. Yeah, maybe some
um
people pick a new drug. Motrin.
so is there any other concerns with these distro boxes? I think I've heard, I don't remember if I've heard this concern about Idaho's water, but I know other states have had problems with finding contraception in their runoff and that not being filtrated through the water system. Is that something that you've heard any talk about in concern with these distro boxes as well?
Yeah, I mean, I would say again, because of the type of drug it is, that would be a concern. There's actually a book that I read called In the Name of the Pill. I can't remember the guy's name right now, but he talks a little bit about how the things that these pills are made up of, they don't, our bodies can't actually process them, and so we urinate them out. So that's the problem that you're running into. So is that with like birth control and everything, like you have these essentially fake hormones that your body can't really process. And so all of it just goes into our water. And you think, millions of women on birth control for a number of years, like what is that doing to the water? Now we're seeing that it's in our water. I want to say it's fake estrogens, but again, I hate to say things like that when I haven't like closely researched it. But I do know in the book I read in the name of the pill, this guy's a researcher. And again, I would say the same thing. Like I didn't agree with his resolution. He's not particularly pro-life. He just is a person who did a lot of research on birth control and where it came from and thought it was shocking.
Yeah.
But he talks a lot about these fake estrogens that we cannot process. And so into the water they go. Again, I'm just not a pharmacy doctor. So I'm not exactly sure what is specifically in the levonorgestrel that is in Plan B. I know it's different than, like a chemical abortion is mifepristone and misoprostol. So I know more about those drugs than I do about the morning after pill.
Okay. And then, so we kind of talked about what these reproductive distro boxes are, how people are getting them, and what bill it was attached to, or not Bennett, the Senate, it was Senate bill. Could you remind me of the Senate bill?
Oh, it's SB 1329.
SB 1329. So at this point, what are we to do? Where is our movement? How are we going forward to kind of combat this problem that we're seeing in Idaho?
Yeah, so the first thing we did was we contacted a couple of other major pro-life organizations. We drafted a letter and we said, do you guys want to sign on? They said yes. So there's a couple of different groups. My group, Operation Rescue, Created Equal, a couple of different other ones. Um, CC for Life, Restoration Project. Can't remember the fifth one. But anyway, we drafted a letter to the Attorney General and said, and then what we did is we did draft my group, Operation Rescue, drafted the letter. We asked these organizations if they wanted to sign on like a coalition, but then we also put it out to Idaho citizens through I think your mom group perhaps and some other groups. And so we have total about like 34 parents, grandparents, medical professionals in the state who signed on. We didn't take like a lot of time, like we wanted to go ahead and get the letter to the Attorney General. So we did like a few weeks and said, hey, if you want to sign on, sign on. But people readily signed on to it with their concerns. So we sent that to the Attorney General um probably around oh gosh before the end of the year, before Christmas, and then didn't really hear back from them until mid-January, and the Attorney General's office kind of passed the buck, basically just said sorry, this legislation doesn't let the Attorney General um really enforce anything. So they suggested maybe a legislative change, which isn't a bad idea. But it did feel like they didn't really investigate. So we gave them an example. One thing that can be kind of frustrating, I guess, with like this kind of activism is like it's actually not our job to patrol the state. Or people in the state. It's not our job to patrol businesses that might be trying to get around the abortion ban. It's really the state's job. And so it is frustrating when they write back and just say, sorry, not our problem, which is essentially what the letter said. So that was kind of disappointing, but we don't give up very easily. And so we redid the letter a little bit, just like a few changes, and we sent it to the office of the governor. And I just did that last week. So we're waiting to hear back from them. Now, in the meantime, one, I don't think it's a bad idea to investigate legislative options. A simple law that clarifies that businesses are not allowed to give out contraception to minors. I mean, that would probably be easy to pass in Idaho, I bet. At least with I think you guys have a pretty pro-life legislature.
Mm-hmm.
So again, our Attorney General didn't give a bad suggestion. It's just frustrating that it felt like they didn't even really look into it. Like they just immediately were like, here, this is not our deal. Um, so I would think that one, our next step will be to ask Idaho citizens to start contacting some key legislatures or legislators, and maybe even contacting the governor's office. We've done that before. We do kind of like call campaigns, and what it does is it usually inundates the office with calls, but it does get their attention. So some people are like, oh, you're gonna bug them, you're gonna bother them, but it's kind of like the squeaky wheel gets the oil.
Yeah.
Like they have to know that citizens are actually concerned about this before sometimes they'll really pay any attention to it. And there's
Yeah.
only one way to do that, and that's to tell them you're concerned about it. So that's kind of what we're looking at, some grassroots efforts that we can work towards. Because these businesses are not gonna, the abortion industry isn't gonna just pack up and go home because you passed an abortion ban, you know? They've made it clear with the amendment, we talked about earlier that they're trying to get on the ballot. Um, yeah, they're not giving up in abortion-free states. I live in Alabama. That's where I'm based, and they haven't given up there. We still have a Planned Parenthood that's open. There's at least two other abortion clinics that can no longer do abortions, but they've remained open as like reproductive health care. They do some transgender drugs, stuff like that. But they're waiting. They're looking for another opportunity to overturn whatever's in their way and to continue doing abortions. Um, So, yeah, I mean, citizens are going to have to, use their voice. That's what they can do. That's their avenue. They have a voice. They're allowed to speak. They're allowed to vote. They're allowed to go and talk to legislatures. So that would be kind of this idea of like this grassroots campaign is kind of where we're headed.
So I guess the question I would kind of follow up on is the letter that you sent, is there a suggestion? Did you provide a suggestion for them to address anything with these, or were you basically just asking for policing of these companies? I guess what does, yeah, what were what were you, what was the letter directed to the
So
board?
the letter, because it was to the Attorney General, our first request was to investigate if if any law is being broken, essentially. um, to look into whether or not now the law we thought was most applicable was SB 1329. That's the law we thought was most applicable. But what we asked them to do was to look into this and also to take an active part because, like I said, the abortion industry isn't going to give up.
Right,
And if you give the abortion industry an inch, they will take a mile. So the if if state officials just kind of let this fly under the radar and they don't really look into it, well, that's communicating to the abortion industry that they can do something flying under the radar because they're not going to look into it. And that's not how you keep strong protections for children in the womb in your state. So that was our initial request. Our initial request was, will you investigate this? Can you get back to us and tell us, like, are we right? Are we wrong? Is this okay? What's going on? And like I said, the Attorney General just sort of wrote back and said, sorry, not my job. Um, so now we moved on to the governor. And again, the letter is the same. It's asking him to investigate. It's asking state officials to look into this. Is this something that is illegal or that is going to that needs to be remedied through maybe a legislative move?
right.
So like I said, our next plan would probably be to find key legislators that we could talk to with these concerns, see if there maybe is a legislative move, or but really in the meantime, I just don't think it should be a problem for the office of the governor or the office of the attorney general. I just don't think it should be a problem for them to be concerned and look into it. I just
Mhm.
think that I was really disappointed with the attorney general's answer.
So I think the last thing I was going to bring up, just because I know that you're in the pro-life work, is we have a bill that is being proposed in Idaho, or it's not being proposed yet. So it's the Idaho Reproductive Freedom and Privacy Initiative of 2026. And as it stands right now, we kind of talked offline about this. They are at about 50,000 signatures, and they need to surpass 71,000 to get this initiative on the ballot for 2026. And we talked about a little bit again offline. I'm just kind of catching up the audience here. So it grants the right to abortion up to viability, and then it offers allows abortion after viability only in cases of medical emergency. It continues on to talk about contraception, IVF, fertility treatments, and so on. But one of the things we had talked about offline that I think is really important to kind of just highlight on this is what you had talked about on the word viability. So could you go on to could you tell our audience a little bit more about why this bill is a little bit more concerning, based of your findings earlier?
Yeah, so we've been tracking these amendments in different states as well. And of course, there were a ton on the 2024 ballots, and a lot of them passed, really unfortunate. Only a couple of states were able to really defeat those amendments or to pass. I think Nebraska actually succeeded in passing their own amendment that I want to say it creates a protection up to 12 weeks, I think the first trimester. So what we noticed in all of these, because as you and I were talking about, a lot of times an advocacy group, an abortion group, law group is going to like basically write this legislation And then different states can kind of tailor it to their own state. Like you have like a basic format, I guess, or a template. So one thing that we noticed that in all of these amendments, including the one in Idaho, the definition for fetal viability is if a fetus has the significant likelihood of sustained survival outside of the uterus with extraordinary medical measures. And that part's very important because they don't define what extraordinary medical measures are. So let's say that a woman sues because she wants to have an abortion, or she says that her baby will be born and need oxygen when they're born, or like my daughter, when she was born, she had to be intubated right away because her lungs were underdeveloped because she was 3 months early. So let's say that a court decides that intubation at birth is an extraordinary medical measure, so those children can be aborted. um, they're leaving this viability definition vague on purpose. And we see this all the time with pro-abortion bills. They always leave a lot of room for interpretation. And so one of the concerns with this definition of viability is that it could easily breeze past what they might actually consider viability right now, because it's all based on if they can survive outside without extraordinary medical measures. And it's a huge difference from even in Roe v. Wade. When you look up how they defined viability, they acknowledged that the child might have to survive with medical help. So you see this reversal of, like, now they're saying without medical help, essentially. And it's really dangerous. And I don't think that people, voters, I don't think in some of these states they're really comprehending what damage the abortion industry can do with just a little bill that doesn't seem that bad. It's just up to viability, you know? It's really, they they use the law to twist it to get more abortion all the time. That's what they want all the time. They're never happy. The abortion industry is never happy stopping at viability. The abortion industry wants abortion through all 9 months for any reason. And that is completely available in our country. You can definitely get an abortion at 9 months for any reason. So voters really need to be wary of when they hear something where they say, oh, this is a moderate bill, or oh, well, this is not an extreme bill. It's not abortion through all 9 months. No, it's not right now. But the way that they word it, it could easily become that. And every single one of these bills had this definition, this new definition of fetal viability in it.
So, one of the things I keep hearing from you, and I think is important to ask, is about the abortion industry. Now, because I think about this, the people working in abortion, like abortionists who are actually performing these abortions, I think to myself, how could they perform such atrocity? And my only thing I can think of, and I would love to hear if your opinion differs or if I'm wrong, but it just seems like it's like money and power is the only thing I can think of. Would you say that's the right thing, or why do you think this industry just doesn't give up or isn't transformed, by truth and goodness? Like, do you have any opinions or thoughts on that?
Oh yeah. The abortion industry, and I say that when I say the abortion industry, I mean I would include in that abortion clinics, abortionists, pro-abortion politicians, abortion lobbyists, Planned Parenthood, political action groups. I mean, all of that is the abortion industry. All of it is an industry that makes a lot of money off of the death of children. And it's their priority. You can even see, I mean, and like right now, if you look at the Democratic Party, abortion is one of the hills they are willing to die on. They will do anything to keep abortion central. And actually that doesn't resonate with a lot of voters anymore because they're so extreme. They've gotten so extreme. Um, but I do think, one, yes, I do think it has a lot to do with money and greed. Yes, I do think it has a lot to do with power. And I don't even mean political power. I mean like the power over life and death. Kermit
Mm.
Gosnell, right? He was a serial killer. His victims were late-term babies, right? I mean, he kept trophies. I don't know if you're familiar with Kermit Gosnell, but He is an abortionist who actually went to prison. He had a clinic in Philadelphia. The state officials decided to look the other way. They weren't gonna really inspect abortion clinics. They were just gonna kind of give them a free pass. And this guy was doing, nobody even knows how late of the late term abortions he was doing because on Sundays, him and his wife were the only people there, and they did the latest abortions on those days, and they didn't write them down. He had trophies. He had little feet in jars when they went into his clinic in his home. This was a serial killer. And he is in prison now. And the abortion industry, when this happened, said, oh, he's an outlier. Oh, he's an outlier. He's not an outlier. Douglas Carpin was another abortionist in Texas who his employees came out and said that he was literally ripping the heads off of babies that were born alive. I mean, this is really horrible stuff. The abortion industry is it's so dark and it's so evil, and it puts on this face of empowerment of women. It puts on this face of feminism and science, and it's none of that. It's extremely evil. And I think the people that get caught up in it, we know, I mean, we research abortionists all the time. I did a campaign a couple years ago on sexual predators in the abortion industry, abortionists who had sexually abused women repeatedly and maintained their license. Did not lose their license over it. We see abortionists all the time that have problems with addiction. They have problems with domestic violence. They have criminal records. These are not like pristine doctors. These are people, a lot of these abortionists are people who couldn't hack it in any other industry. And so they, or any other field, and they end up doing abortion. Some of them get into financial trouble and they start moonlighting as an abortionist. They just do it on the side for like extra money because they're living outside their means. And all of it is evil, and all of it is the enemy, the devil, trying to destroy these people. And abortion doesn't just destroy a baby. Abortion destroys everything it touches. It destroys the mother, it destroys the doctor who's doing it, it destroys the nurse who's helping, it destroys the grandparent who drove them there. It destroys everybody. And I think I really do think people are waking up to this idea of how bad it is. But at the same time, I think they still haven't even started to examine the depths of how bad abortion is and how destructive it's been in our culture and in our communities. So, to answer your question, yes, power and money always. But there's a brokenness there, there's a brokenness in humanity, and the enemy will take you down any way he can. And I mean, I helped one time with a retreat for people that had worked in the abortion industry. And I was on the peripheral. My job was to go pick these ladies up and take them to the retreat center. And one of them just told me, that she just came home and sat in her bathroom and cried every day and she couldn't figure out why. You know, she just didn't know because she was killing children every day, and I'm sure you've heard like Abby Johnson's story, and other people that have come out of the industry. They really believe they're doing good at some point, and then something happens that those scales fall off their eyes and they realize the destruction they've been reaping in their own lives and in the lives of others, and it brings them to repentance. Um, and that's a mercy for them. It's a kindness. We work to expose abortion and abortionists all the time. And some people might say, oh, well, that's mean. Like it might be mean to point out to let somebody to go out and stand in front of an abortion clinic and like expose who an abortionist is. Well, in my mind, that's the kindest thing I could do, because the kindest thing that could happen to that abortionist is that he or she loses their job and is in a place where God can reach them and where they could learn grace and mercy and repentance, and then start doing real medical work where they're actually helping instead of harming. It's a spiritual battle. Abortion is a spiritual battle, and it's really hard to stomach it sometimes. And I think that people underestimate that, just how serious it is.
Yeah. I think a good place to end might be in a prayer. Do you have one that you guys use? I don't know if your company would allow that, but do you have a prayer specifically for the unborn, and those victims of abortion?
We do have a liturgy for the preborn that I've done in front of tons of clinics, and it has a really great prayer. And this it's actually the my previous boss, Father Terry Genzimer, he's the one who assembled it, I guess, wrote it. I don't know if you'd say wrote it because he kind of like put it together. But he actually it's made from like it's essentially a funeral service, but for babies in the womb. And so it's made to be done in front of an abortion clinic um where babies are dying.
Well,
And
I think this would be a good time to, as we know that abortion is not done in the, is not over, is still a battle to be fight. We can offer this up for the children of today.
so this is one of the prayers in this liturgy. And it's a prayer, it's a rescue for the preborn.
Okay.
So would you like me to pray it?
Yeah, I would love to.
Okay. O God of beginnings, you are the creator of all life. As we begin this week, be near us as we unite with our preborn brothers and sisters who are scheduled for death. May you, by your Holy Spirit and by the voice of your church, lead your people to rescue from death the innocent children and to bring those who participate in their death to true repentance, that they may taste of your goodness and mercy. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm so glad that you were able to come on today. And I do kind of apologize. I've been sick for a while, so I feel like I wasn't as like straightforward as I wanted to be, but
No, it's
I
fine.
think that it'll bless many. So I want to thank you so much for your expertise and for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed talking with you today.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Desert Wanderers. If you liked it, give us a thumbs up as well as subscribe down below. We're produced by Salt and Light Radio, so you can find us on social platforms at Salt and Light Radio or Desert Wanderers Podcast. We produce episodes every week and we launch them for you on Wednesdays. So make sure to tune in for next week's episode and we'll see you then.